Welcome back to Move Ahead with Dalia. Today I'm joined by my friend and author Linda Peters, whose new book, The Chronicles of George Floyd and Other Selected Writings, explores the impact of George Floyd's murder through bold, personal poetry and prose. Linda's work has appeared in 17 Magazine, U.S. News and World Report, and the Langston Hughes Quarterly, among others. Take a listen. Hi, Linda.
Hey, Dalia.
Thank you for joining me again on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Of course, and congratulations on your new book.
Thank you.
Please tell me the name of the book and what led you to write this incredible book.
It's called The Chronicles of George Floyd and Other Selected Writings. Half the book is a collection of poetry that I just did during that whole turbulent summer of 2020 when he was murdered, and we kept seeing it over and over on our televisions day in, day out, and it just became so upsetting that I just couldn't sleep. I couldn't function. So, and of course it was during COVID, so I was still an essential worker, going to work with my mask and the social distancing and all of that fear.
Yeah.
So I just started writing in my journal and just writing out my thoughts, just getting them out of me. And they kind of became poems, each one. And I didn't set out to do it. It just started happening organically from all these emotions and thoughts and reactions and responses that kept welling up every time I would see it, or every time there was a comment on it, or every time there was another protest that broke out in the country and in the world.
Yeah.
So it was just so overwhelming that writing about it was my way to just kind of cope, and is also very therapeutic because it was a traumatizing experience.
I see. Yeah. So your book's introduction is really raw and riveting.
Thank you.
And, I'd love for you to share like that day, that week. What were you feeling? I mean, you said a little bit already, but tell me about that, because I felt reading that introduction that I was in the living room watching that TV with you.
Because I was by myself watching this man, this black man, who was alive, who was not armed, being pinned down in the street by a police officer who vows to protect and serve the community. And yet this police officer was literally suffocating the life out of this black man, with other police officers surrounding him and bystanders trying to get him to stop. So it was this overwhelming sense of horror and helplessness mixed together. And also, of course, being alone, that didn't help. So it was just a terrifying experience.
Yeah. And what I'd love to do is, here's the book. I'd love for you to read a couple of the paragraphs from the introduction.
Absolutely. He kept dying in my living room over and over. I couldn't sleep. I was nauseous. I was in the middle of COVID like the rest of the world. Scared, frightened, hearing about thousands on the death toll rising every single day. It was a plague. It was an invisible, silent plague that was spreading through the world and my skin. I was helpless. I was indoors. I was trapped. He kept dying in my living room. He kept getting killed in my living room over and over. And he looked like my father, my dead father. He reminded me of how my father looked. Tall, strong, dark-skinned, very short afro, long legs, long arms. He looked like my father. Maybe that's why it hit me so hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very difficult to read the introduction because I felt, as I mentioned earlier, that I was in the room with you and I felt that pain.
Yeah.
really great writing.
Thank you.
Beautiful writing. I'm a true believer in the power of journaling. I've been journaling just like you for decades.
That's great.
Yeah. And I understand how that can help heal and process difficult emotions.
Yes.
So, how did that process help you with your experience?
Well, seeing all of that unfold, you just want to scream. You just want to stop it from happening. You just want to rewind the tape and make him alive again. And that helplessness is just so overwhelming that putting all those emotions on paper and not caring about the sentence structure or the grammar or the punctuation or the spelling or how it looks on the paper, just getting it out of my head and my heart and putting it out on the paper was so therapeutic. And what also started happening when I would read it and it became a poem, it was very empowering because at least there's some good that's coming out of this horrific experience, that there's something that I can say, this is something that is creation of mine that encapsulates exactly what I'm feeling, and maybe someone else can use it to process what they're feeling. So I did share it with my family and a couple of trusted friends, and they gave me very positive feedback. So I kept writing.
Yeah, I understand why. And I feel like in many ways when you're releasing this book and people will read it and it will take them back to that time, but then at least they'll say, wow, I wasn't the only one feeling depressed and hurt and suffering through that. Linda was too, and many others.
And millions across the world.
Yeah.
So we all experienced this traumatic, this moment that just was so traumatizing in the midst of COVID.
Yeah.
So how do you put that together? There's no vaccine against racism, right? And at that point, I don't think we had a vaccine against COVID. I don't even think it had come out yet because that was 2020. So we were in this fear upon fear, traumatic, isolated moment. And the fact that people, including myself, braved the elements and went outside and protested with hundreds of other people, wearing our masks. It just shows the level of outrage that people felt, that I'm going to risk my health to protest against this horrific murder.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you mentioned in some sections of the book, you mentioned political turbulence in the U.S. And of course, there was many all over the world, but in the U.S. where we live.
Yeah.
And in your eyes, do you see any change that has come out of this horrible situation?
Well, no. In terms of race and police brutality, there were over 200 deaths, I believe, in Chicago last year of people of color by the police. So, but now we're in a flipped kind of environment where the police are trying to go after people who have broken the law in terms of illegal immigration, in terms of that massive influx that happened in the last 4 years under Biden. So now the police and in terms of immigration and anti-immigration are trying to enforce the law, right? So now they're the bad guys instead of the people who have broken the law. So now it's kind of flipped, and I'm not against law enforcement, right? So I can't be like, oh, the police have gone too far. They should not be enforcing the laws that our country has. So we're now in this turbulent moment of where the the law enforcement is actually doing the right thing. And there are many people in the media and in society who are trying to stop them from doing the right thing. Instead of protesting them doing the wrong thing, they're protesting them doing the right thing. And that's what's so hard about this moment, because I think a lot of people in society are very confused by what they're seeing on television and what's the principles behind what's going on. There's a law enforcement trying to happen, and there's people trying to resist law enforcement from happening. Yeah. And the people that came in illegally are being portrayed as victims, and the people trying to enforce our border laws are being looked upon as the criminals. Mm-hmm. So that's what's very confusing for a lot of people.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Do you plan to continue writing about social justice?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And all the stories in the book, not just the poems, have some thread of social justice in there, some theme in there, either religious freedom or freedom to be an Armenian, because I write about the Armenian genocide, freedom to be a Latina who works in a hospital, and she's being forced to translate. There's a story about that. There's a teenager who's being forced to translate for patients and doctors, and she's just volunteering as in the hospital, right, for college, for high school credit, for community service in high school. And yet the doctors and the ER people are kind of pulling her in to translate because they don't speak Spanish. And so there's this huge injustice being done to her that, wait a minute, I'm not here to be translating on the medical conditions. No, I'm just a volunteer. But that just shows, and that's basically violating the law, by the way, that hospitals are doing this and ER rooms are doing this. So that's just one example of how different stories touch on different aspects of social injustice. And to see it from a story of an individual is a lot different from just reading statistics.
True.
Yeah.
True.
Yeah.
Because then we can connect.
You can connect on a human level.
On a human level. Yeah. And aside from the introduction, which is incredible, I know there was in part one, one of the stories that really pulled me in was Probable Cause. And I even had Devin reading it because I read it a couple of times. It's just very, very deep and impactful.
Thank you.
But the other one, which I didn't know about, was the Perpetual Shiro. And that was an amazing story. I want to learn more about this Shiro. Yeah. Tell me a little bit, just a little bit, a little glimpse of her.
Okay, so Perpetua was a young woman in northern Africa who lived in the 3rd century, and she became a Christian through a Bible study. And she was middle-class woman, had a great life, a husband, child. And when she became a Christian and would not kind of bow down to the Roman gods, she was arrested, and with other Christians who would not bow down to these Roman gods. And she was sentenced to death, along with her other fellow Christians, death in the arena. And they were basically attacked by wild animals to the death. And the Romans used it as entertainment. That's how much they cared about Christianity. And so her diary, she kept a diary as when she was in prison. And her diary survived. And so I wrote about her diary when I was getting my master's in theology. And here's this, African woman, Christian. She was 22 when she wrote her diary. I write diaries, I was 22 when I became a Christian. I'm a mother, right? So her firstborn was a boy. My firstborn was a boy. So I had all these things in common with her. And I just saw her bravery and her courage. Like, she was not going to back down, even in the face of death, a terrible death. And she would not back down. She would not bow down. So that's why I wrote about her. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to learn more about her just because of that. section of your book. It's really good.
Thank you.
Is there a poem or a passage in the book that you keep coming back to personally?
The one that keeps coming back is that he looked like my father. That George Floyd, because my father died in 93 of a heart attack when he was 67 years old.
Sorry.
And he was very tall, long legs, looked very similar to George Floyd. So that's why it hit me so hard. And we just celebrated Father's Day. Yeah. And so all of that kind of got stirred up. And so I think that's what really resonated. And that really didn't hit me until I wrote the introduction. When I was writing the introduction, I realized, wait a minute, he looks like my father. Like, I didn't even realize that when I was writing these poems. It just hit me. And I think it might have not surfaced until now because it would just be too painful to surface back 5 years ago. But yeah, certain things you don't really realize until you start processing and unpacking them. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say about the process when you're writing.
Yeah.
You could write something like you've done with the book, read it again, and then one day something clicks.
Yeah.
And now you realize that this was something that was really tugging at you.
Yeah. Yeah. And I wanted to get it out on the 5th anniversary of the murder because I knew that more eyes would be on that story and not sweep it under the rug.
Yes.
Because it kind of has been swept under the rug.
Yeah.
And now with all the turbulence regarding illegal immigration, it's kind of being swept under the rug, even though this is the 5th year. And this was the 5th, this summer marks the 5th summer of that.
Well, and I love that in the earlier part of the book, you give name to many of the victims of police brutality.
Yes.
And there's a lot of them.
There's a lot of them.
Yeah.
And I didn't even, of course, couldn't name all of them. But the point of naming so many of them was that to show the reader that George Floyd was not an isolated incident. It was part of a long pattern in our history.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes. Mm-hmm. And where can the audience find this incredible book of yours?
Thank you. On Amazon.
Okay.
There's a paperback and a Kindle. There's also a Spanish version in Kindle. So Amazon is a place to get it.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Is there anything else you want to share about the book, about your experience, before we wrap up the podcast?
Well, it's really interesting reading it out loud to people. I did a reading at a cafe on June 1st, and to hear other people, because that was the first time I've read them in public, and to hear other people connect with certain lines in different poems, certain phrases, was really powerful for me as a writer to realize the power of language, the power of words, the power of art, to really connect with perfect strangers. I didn't know these people, right? I knew a couple of them, but to connect with perfect strangers about something that happened 5 years ago. They watched it on TV, but now they're experiencing it at a deeper level. And that was really rewarding. So I hope to do more public readings.
Yes, I think that would be really great.
Thank you.
I do just want to mention again that the introduction is really something that will pull you in. You won't put it down. And it took me back to that day as well, not just to the mindset of the author and what you were going through, but it took me back to that shocking day and that shocking week and all the things that kept running that year and beyond. So thank you.
Can I just add one more thing?
Of course.
So if anyone wants to contact me to schedule a reading, they can email me at time4progressnow@gmail.
Okay, so time for progress now at Gmail, and the 4 is a number 4.
4 is a number 4.
Okay, wonderful.
Okay.
Thank you, Linda.
Thank you.
I appreciate that.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Hey, thank you so much for listening today. If you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe so you can keep up with my latest episodes. You can find me on all social media platforms at Dalia the Realtor. To reach me directly, call me at 773-879-4855. I'll see you on the next episode. Make it a great day.